Gosh, you're such a compliant audience. All seated and ready to go. That's great, thank you. We're just going to do a very quick audio check with Linda. So, Linda, I know you're muted at the moment. Can you just unmute yourself and do a bit of a wee song or something so we can hear you?
Good morning. How are you this morning?
The guys are just checking your sound, so...
Hello, Kate.
What's the weather like over there?
It's a beautiful sunny day in Perth today.
Of course it is, it's Western Australia.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's the same for you.
They're just refining your sound because it is... What's it sound like from down there? A little bit quiet. Okay. Oh, they'll keep adjusting it, Linda. So we're going to make a start. I'll just start with introducing you, Linda. So hopefully you've been online and watching. But so I'm Kate, the chair of ANZREG. It's really weird because I know you can probably see me, but I can't see you. So I'm just kind of vaguely looking in the direction of the camera. Okay, so we're starting with Linda Sheedy. So Linda is the Coordinator Collection Access at Curtin University in Perth. She's had a long involvement with reading list services during her career. From 2003, she was the implementing lead of the university's in-house e-reserve service. In 2015, she became the Curtin lead project manager for the implementation of Leganto. In 2018, she and the reading list team were nominated for the Vice-Chancellor's Excellence Award in the category of Innovation. Successfully achieving a full rollout of the system in 2016, Linda is now responsible for the reading list service at Curtin University. So I'm going to hand over to Linda for her presentation, Predicting Student Success with Leganto. And Linda, you've got 25 minutes and we'll allow about 5 minutes for questions. If you start going over time, I've got a little bell that I'm going to ring somehow. So I'll hand it over to you and thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak at ANZREG 2019. And thank you to the generosity of the Australian and New Zealand group of ex-Libris users committee, without whose sponsorship I would not have been able to attend Igloo 2019 or speak to you today. I enjoyed the Igloo conference very much and I hope that you will enjoy this presentation as well. The aim of this presentation is to explore the machine learning project, Predicting Student Success, looking under the hood as it were, and also revealing the findings of which I know you are so keen to hear. For myself, we at Curtin are proud to show off our machine learning aspect of this project as an example of potential innovation and transformative power held within Leganto data to enhance the university environment. I hope you will enjoy this insight into a practical application of that theory. I would like to thank Associate Director Peter Green and Library Management System Analysis David Lewis from Curtin University, as well as Mr. Gal Rom and Mr. Tomar Katz for their efforts in bringing this project to life. As Kate said, my name is Sheedy and I'm the Coordinator Collection Access at Curtin University. This slide shows a photo of my home, the T.L. Robertson Library, housed on the Perth Curtin campus in Bentleigh, Western Australia. I've had a long history with reading list services at Curtin, commencing with the service in 2003. At Curtin, reading lists has always worked hand in hand with the university's copyright management objectives. Also, it is linked with ensuring that students have access to the actual resources to which they are being referred to by academics, not just the copyright compliant ones that we need to record, but all resources, including books, ebooks, journal articles, conference papers, websites, and audio-visual streaming materials. Curtin has 36,832 full-time equivalent students who need to access learning and teaching resources every year. And so broadly, we're talking about all of our undergraduate and master's programs, including Open Universities Australia. Having this background, of course, has been very useful in facilitating the transition from our previous service, which was an in-house developed system, to using Leganto product as the foundation of our new service. The service we have created from Leganto is not too different from the previous one. The service continues to be the bedrock of copyright compliance for the university in its role of centralised copyright reporting. It is the front end whereby a new interface is available to academics and students alike via our learning management system Blackboard, which has given the old service a new, fresh and dynamic face, making it easier for academics to self-report their learning and teaching needs, and then elegantly and with minimum effort push that work out to be repurposed by students to support their needs. Curtin's connection with Leganto started when we became early adopters in 2015, then following a soft launch of the product from June to November in semester 2 of 2016. We mainstreamed Leganto into the university environment for the start of semester 1 2017, which was in the February of that year. In the Leganto system, we currently have 4,700 plus reading lists that were created by more than 400 instructors, to which 115,000 plus citations are under management by the library. These include library-owned and non-library-owned resources, meeting the needs of more than 42,000 students over a 3-year period. From the beginning, the use of Leganto was strong and allowed us to amass a large amount of data in a short time, making us a prime candidate to contribute to the Predicting Student Success with Leganto, a proof of concept machine learning project. The phrase proof of concept means to gather evidence, typically within the scope of a project or a pilot, which seeks to determine whether, as in this case, a design concept is feasible. The proof of concept project proposed by Ex Libris then was limited to the goal of determining if any predictive correlations could be established between student activity in Leganto and success in their final student grades. In 2017, Ex Libris approached the Leganto customers of the time to see whether there was anyone interested in participating in such a project. Curtin University Library was the only organisation that accepted the invitation to participate. I think in many ways, Curtin staff are inherently curious about new things, and machine learning certainly fitted the brief. And in this instance, because Curtin University is quite active in the area of learning analytics to predict student success, this was a good fit for us. We also thought we were a good fit for Ex Libris because, as discussed earlier, our implementation had generated pretty big data sets of Leganto activity in the preceding years that we could make available to the project. And we really wanted to know, can Leganto contribute to the conversation of student retention within the university? And if so, is this something that the university can offer to is this something that the library can offer to the university so as to centralise our place in the learning and teaching environment? And so we agreed to partner with Ex Libris on the project. I would like to thank Peter, Toma and Gail for providing the following slides about their side of the project. Machine learning is an application of artificial intelligence that provides systems the ability to automatically learn and improve from experience without being explicitly programmed, and so focuses on the development of computer programs that can access data and use it to learn for themselves. A formula like the one on the screen is used to frame the project in machine learning terms. The object of using machine learning as a method for interrogating data is to meet a business need, which here is represented on our slide as T. T stands for target or the business need. In other words, what is the business need we are seeking to answer? The target for this project was to predict students early in the semester that will most likely struggle with their course. The key word here is early, somewhere in the range of 1 to 6 weeks of a unit starting. Machine learning algorithms use data that may be structured or unstructured to create a data set. In this case, the data is available from 2 sources. Curtin provided the student profile and their grades and academic status. Of course, this data was anonymised at both ends of the project. Ex Libris already had the Leganto student engagement data. For Curtin, there was significant time and effort put into being able to produce the data that was required for the project. There were permissions to be supplied and data to be produced, and these were obtained from the University Student Services and accessed with the support from Curtin's Digital and Technology Solutions unit. It was also a long-haul project as the Leganto data needed to accumulate over multiple semesters, and then the success data, such as student grades, were also not available until a significant period of time after the semester's conclusion. Obviously then, the preliminary results needed to be checked thoroughly before they could be confirmed that they would reliably produce the required results and finally proof the concept. There were significant amounts of effort that went into creating a meaningful, unified data set. The goal then was to match meaningful features within that data set. For example, the algorithm needed to compensate for matching student engagement in relation to other classmates and to allow for the weighted student engagement per course. That is to say, courses divided by student load to account for students who may have a higher or lower course load than normal. And of course, the data is complex. A university's course structure is as complicated as its student demographics. The language between the 2 systems isn't standard. Consider unit versus course, instructor versus unit coordinator. F is for function. That is, the ability to transform the data to answer the business question. The part of Ex Libris's work was to test the algorithms to see which one would best answer the target question. Potential algorithms that Ex Libris considered included the decision tree, generalized linear model, Naev's Bayes classifiers, support vector machines, and random forest. By the conclusion of the project, it looked like the random forest will be the most adequate algorithm. However, Ex Libris is cautious to say that this will be the final algorithm that will be used. Maybe something that changes. What is more likely is that the final outcome will involve a 2-stage model. That is to say, the random forest fed through another model. So far, Curtin has provided data from semester 2, 2016, through to the end of semester 2, 2018. If we look to the top left of the slide, we can review what proved to be the most the 5 most significant features crucial to the model. They were student historical average grades, historical Leganto usage, weighted student usage per course, student age, and usage in week 1 in relation to the class. What's important to note is that these features were discovered from the data. That is to say, they've come out of the data. They weren't the features that were dictated at the starting point where the answers might have been assumed to have existed, but a part of the machine learning algorithm's findings that have discovered that these features about the data were the most useful. If we now turn our attention to the bottom left-hand side of the screen, you'll notice that there's reference to a confusion matrix. A confusion matrix is a table that is often used to describe the performance of a classification model on a set of test data for which the true values are known. It allows the visualization of the performance of an algorithm. The model takes the data into the machine learning algorithms and trains and test sets in order to make a prediction. The algorithm assigns 2 values, 0 or 1, that is to say 0 meaning is not at risk, or 1 meaning is at risk. So of course, if we were to look at the data, we'd know if the student struggled or not. But the model doesn't know when it is fed the data, and it is the ability of the algorithm to learn and accurately predict the outcome that is important to this project. It was determined that the model developed a 91.9% correctness. But this wasn't the most important finding. To address the original target, to meet the business need, we wanted to know something about student success. As our definition of success matured over time, we came to view this as being framed by wanting to see if the algorithm could correctly identify those who are struggling. Other terminology that we learnt about machine learning were precision and recall. Precision is the percentage of results that are relevant, whilst recall is the percentage of relevant results which are correctly classified by the algorithm. The precision of this model is good at 70%. Another way to think of this is if 10 students are identified to be potentially at risk, 7 will actually be at risk. The recall, that is to say those actually at risk, is not so good, as the algorithm is not catching 80% of those who will struggle. That is to say that it didn't find all the students at risk from the precision set. This led to the conclusion that the model needs more work, but in general, it is encouraging that the model has a high precision, reminding you that this is the model's ability to find relevant results, in that everyone that was identified is a true positive. They are at risk. In this particular project though, Tomar tells me that it is better to have higher precision than recall, so that while it would be better to increase the recall, this should not be at the expense of precision, simply because you don't want to exclude people prematurely. So what was the conclusion? It was that while the algorithm may not find everyone at risk, everyone identified by the model is likely to be at risk. As to the future and how this model might work, it is believed that more data and effort could improve the model. An idea of how the model might work then is that both Leganto and the institution feed data into the predictive model per semester, per faculty, which will identify the students at risk, whereby the model will learn and improve. The current model is based on features from week 1, as well as the first 6 weeks of Leganto activity. However, another future direction may be to see if the model can run on the first 4 weeks with the same precision and recall to try and get these earlier detections being fed back sooner. Although not the case when the presentation was given in Singapore, the project is now essentially concluded. There are no indicators yet as to whether this will become part of Leganto's offerings, although Tamar Sadir, the VC of Learning and Teaching at Ex Libris, while at Igloo, indicated that she was now considering where to from here for the findings that the project has generated. For now, though, that is a future we will need to look forward to. Let me just say in conclusion that it was incredibly useful to participate in this project with Ex Libris, and the opportunity to participate in a machine learning analytics project was one that Curtin University embraced for the learning opportunities that were inherent in the project. We are keen to see where the future of machine learning will take library operations as we continue to look for ways Leganto can contribute to our organisation's overall goals of being central to the university's learning and teaching aspirations. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. That presentation was, I think, really relevant to a lot of institutions. I know from University of Otago it's something that is of real concern, and seeing that there are abilities through what you were talking about with reading list systems like Leganto is really encouraging to see that kind of information is being fed up to Ex Libris. I'm just going to open it up for questions from the floor. So we've got microphones. It might just take a wee minute for people to get the microphones. If you have a question, can you just hold the microphone really close to your mouth so everyone on the floor can hear you as well as Linda?
Hi, Alison Sinclair from the University of the Sunshine Coast. I just wondered what happened after you did this project. Were there any discussions about what kind of intervention might happen to catch these students who were at risk of failure, or was it too late by then because the data's sort of reporting on something in the past? Like what was going to happen as a result of you detecting these students at risk of failure, I guess?
Yeah. So thank you, Alison. The project really was a closed project. All the data was anonymised, so the data that was used in the project wasn't used to identify students in that. So we didn't look at trying to get that information and pass it on. That wasn't part of the expectation of that project, because, being a proof of concept, it might have been that it was discovered that the data didn't show anything and couldn't do anything. So obviously we were really pleased that wasn't the findings, but we will be like everybody else. If Leganto or if Ex Libris develops something that comes back to the universities to use, I guess we'll look at where that data goes, who can best use it, particularly if it's around retaining students. I hope that helps.
Hi, I was just wondering, I noticed that the only student demographic data that you had was age. Was any thought given to including other demographic information that might improve recall? So are they an international student? Are they a distant student? Is English their second language? Because those kind of demographics alongside of reading list uptake might actually improve it.
So, as I said, that probably as it turns out, one of the most controversial findings of the project, that the algorithm found that itself. So it wasn't the bit that was fed it to work on. It actually decided itself that was a major feature in identifying the student's success. And yes, that one's been the most interesting. I've had lots of questions about that since we presented at Singapore.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
One more question, just a quick one. You did mention about the definition of student success was gradually improved. Would you help us to understand this a little bit more? Like, in what sense, and how do you improve the analysis?
Yeah. So I think I caught the question. When we started the project, I guess the idea was that it was hoped that perhaps it would be proved that Leganto could show that students succeed if they use reading lists. Maybe that was the idea of where it started from. But as we went along, it became more apparent that the algorithm was more likely to discover who was more likely to struggle, and that's where the focus of the project, I think, was shifted to, and that's sort of where it's landed. Because as it went along, it just seemed that was what the algorithm was doing a good job of. I hope that helps.
Okay, Linda, that looks like probably all the questions from the floor. So I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to do that remote presentation for us. And I think if anyone does have any more questions, you'd be willing for them to send them via email or tweet them. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, and I hope everyone has a great day, and I'm so sorry that I can't be there with you. But take care. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Linda. Okay, we just have a minute or two for the next speaker to come and get organised. So that's Jessie Donaghey, so we'll just get her set up. Just while Jessie's getting ready, I'm just going to mention that if you haven't seen it, there's a table over in the corner here for charging any devices. So if you're running out of juice by lunchtime, you can put your device over there and get some power. I'm just going to wait for a minute or so because I'm really aware that we've got people who may be coming in to the live stream waiting for it to start at 11:30, and I don't want them to miss the first couple of minutes. So. Okay, we'll make a start with Jessie. So I want to introduce Jessie Donaghey. Jessie is the Digital Services Librarian here at Bond University. She's interested in exploring ways to enhance student learning within the academic environment and discovering new methods to engage customers with library services. Jessie is a member of the Igaloo Aluna Analytics Working Group. She's a member of the team recently winning the 2019 HLA Medical Director Digital Health Innovation Award for their work with Alma APIs for resource sharing. So her presentation today is understanding user behaviour and motivations when searching and requesting resources, talking about resource sharing. So over to you, Jessie.
Thank you, Kate. So the focus of my presentation today is just going to be on a small research project I undertook to develop an understanding of user behaviour when requesting resources. So as Kate said, I'll be specifically focusing on resource sharing requests. So often libraries focus on understanding user navigating and searching of discovery layers. We make refinements to our discovery layers in order to increase usability of the interface and focusing on getting users to the full text or the physical availability of an item. But we also need to ensure that providing access to resource sharing services complements and is well integrated into the discovery process. We want the requesting process to be as seamless and not have to make users jump through hurdle in order to get what they need. So our library has definitely made improvements in our resource sharing service over the years with the benefits to users in mind, but we haven't really stopped to evaluate our service or understand user motivations and expectations. Our most recent library services plan included a strategy to ensure that library collections, electronic print and document delivery meet all student and staff requirements at the time of need. One of the goals to meet this strategy was to simplify and promote mechanisms for staff and students to request resources that they cannot find in library search. So one aspect to getting users what they need is our resource sharing service. And this is a service that's available to all Bond University staff and students. And if we want to simplify and promote the best methods, I thought there were two things we could do to help achieve this. One, the first one was just to assess our service by using Primo and Alma analytics data. So by this, we can pinpoint moments in our timeline where changes in system configurations or services impacted our resource sharing service. The second thing we could do is just understand our users a bit better by maybe surveying them and getting a bit more understanding about their experiences and motivations and preferences for using the service. And by doing this, we can ensure that we take the right steps and opportunities, knowing that this is what our users want. So part one was to assess. So to begin with, I thought I'd share a brief history of our resource sharing service. So this will provide an overview of how our service has changed over time and identify key advancements. Then I'll review some Alma and Primo analytics data to discover the kind of impacts our configuration changes have made. And at the end of the session, I'll just share a link to a Google Doc I've put together with the details of each of the analytics reports that I've done, and I've actually saved copies in the community area in analytics, so you can just go in there and run those reports off your own institutional data. So back in 2015, we had a fairly manual process for both users and staff in our resource sharing service. Users were required to fill in a manual form on the library website. Processing requests was also fairly labour intensive. From start to finish, the data for each request would have had to be entered into 4 different systems. It was also difficult for users to know about the service. There was no way for them to request at their point of need, such as in the discovery layer. And even when they could place a request, they couldn't track it themselves in any way. Then in May 2016, we implemented the Alma resource sharing with the Libraries Australia Document Delivery ISO integration. So this means we were able to leverage Alma and Primo to reduce the number of manual tasks for both users and our resource sharing staff. Users no longer had to fill in a form manually. Primo would automatically populate the form with the required metadata. Being able to place the request in Primo meant that users could also track the progress of their requests through their library account. Processing requests became more efficient and communication became more automatic and visible to users. At the beginning of 2018, we enabled silent login for Primo. So this also reduced an additional step for users in the requesting process. If they were already authenticated in another university single sign-on system and then navigated to Primo, they would be shown the document delivery request link without them having to log in or discover that service. But in most cases, before the user could even place a request, they still had one particular hurdle to jump, And that was to tick the tiny little checkbox in the top right-hand corner to expand their results in order to see no full text results and then see the request link. So for most users, they would never think to click on that expand my results feature, and therefore to them the service didn't exist. So towards the end of 2018, we considered what would happen if we enabled the expand my results feature by default. I thought it would be a good idea to get an idea of how well the expand my results feature was used in Primo. So this could give an indication of how much exposure the resource sharing service had during the searching and discovery process. So looking at Primo Analytics, from 2016 to 2018, the percentage of sessions which clicked the expand my results checkbox was fairly stable, and it was also hardly used. So on average, each year, only 1% of sessions actually clicked the expand my results checkbox. So this indicates that although we really try to make the resource sharing requesting process as simple and seamless as possible, it was still quite invisible to the majority of our users. However, we didn't enable the expand my results feature by default straight away. The key concern that came to everyone's mind is that we would be flooding the results with no full text resources and in turn frustrating our users more than really benefiting them. So before we made the decision to turn it on, I took a random sample of search strings from Google Analytics and then just replicated those in Primo with the expand my results checkbox ticked and recorded how many of the results on the first page were no full text. And then I took an average across all the searches I did, and I found that the result was 1.6. So for the average search, the user would not be presented with more than 2 no full text results on the first page of results. So we didn't think that was too bad at all, so we went ahead and enabled the expand my results feature by default. So that was really reducing one more step in the requesting process. So how has this impacted our resource sharing service? So I originally did these slides for the Igloo conference in August. So I did this slide back in August, and I've redone the slide now, and I tell you the data has gone up from even the last 2 months. So we've seen a significant increase in the number of resource sharing requests. So the average increase for supplied requests from January to September this year compared to 2018 is 60%. In addition, we saw a 94% increase in unique requesters compared to 2018, and also an 85% increase in first-time requesters compared to 2018. So as a result, the service now has a greater reach to undergraduate population. I think we saw a 10% increase in the number of requests coming from undergraduates now, and this is really bringing it on par to our postgraduate population, who were previously the most heavy users of our service. So just by making one small configuration change to the searching experience for users, we've been able to firstly remove a hurdle to requesting from our resource sharing service, and which has in turn exposed the service to a more diverse user population and seen a greater uptake. So looking at this bar chart of total requests supplied to users in the past 5 years, every year except for one, there's basically been an increase on the previous year's total. So in May 2016, when we went live with Alma Resource Sharing, we saw an increase in requests. The whole process became more simpler and visible to users. Then in the beginning of 2018, we enabled silent login, and once again we saw an increase. For 2019, I've did this slide originally back in August, and I had added a predicted total for what we would see by the end of 2019. And in fact, we are in October, and we've already met the nearly 4,000 mark of supplied requests. As Tanya can attest to, that the last 2 months has been huge for us. So my predicted total is in fact less than what we're actually going to achieve by the end of 2019. And you can see that just by enabling that expand my results checkbox by default, we have seen the most significant impact on our resource sharing service than in any other year. So using these analytics reports and pinpointing system and configuration changes, whether they were in Alma or in Primo, it's quite evident how the resource sharing service has progressed. So the second part of my investigation was to survey our users to get an idea of their motivations and experiences using our resource sharing service, and attempt to find out whether their expectations actually align with the service that we're providing. So the survey consisted of 13 questions, ranging from user descriptive type questions to questions about their expectations, preferences, and experiences. I sent out the survey over an 8-week period in May to July, and it was sent to users who had recently received something through resource sharing, and in total I received 68 responses. So this is the split of responses to the survey by their user group, and it shows that our postgraduate or research students had the highest response rate and the undergraduates as a lower response rate. I also then compared this split by the split of users who actually do use our resource sharing service, and the postgraduate population, I guess, has a greater say in this survey. I got less responses from undergraduate students than I would have liked, and a little bit more from staff as well. So although the survey may be a little bit less, the results of the survey is a little bit less reflective of our undergraduate population, I kind of expected that. One of the first questions of the survey asked how many times they had used the resource sharing service before. So this would help us understand whether the regular users of the service had different preferences or experiences of the new users of the service. So the most common response was less than 10 times, closely followed by 10 to 50 times, but you can still see there's a large portion of the survey respondents who had used the service for the first time. I wanted to find out how the users had actually discovered the service. Was it something they were seeking specifically, or it just appeared when they needed it? The two most common chosen answers was that the service was recommended to them by library staff at 40%, followed by them finding the request link in Primo themselves at 37%. When I looked at the split of responses for this question, filtered by the type of user, half of the new users, so those that had placed a request for the first time, answered that they found the link in Primo themselves, compared to a third for regular users, so those who'd placed over 50 requests. So for the regular users of the service, the library staff recommendation was the most popular answer. So as we make resource sharing requesting process more intuitive, we could probably expect to see a greater number of new users finding the service by chance in Primo without them having to seek it out specifically or be recommended it by library staff. In the survey, I asked users how long did they expect to wait from the time they placed the request until they received it. Most users expected their article request would take 3 days till they received it. And if we looked at this data based on their user group or the level of service, all of the different variations basically said they expected to receive it within 3 days, which I thought was interesting because I had an assumption that maybe the first-time requesters or undergraduate students may expect a really fast turnaround time, but this wasn't the case at all. And if anything, the users' expectations leaned towards the longer turnaround time than the lesser. When I look at our current turnaround time to see whether expectations were met, we're travelling so far this year with a 3-day turnaround time for article requests. So although in reality we are actually matching our users' expectation for when they would receive the resource, the survey results, I feel like, do suggest that still many users expect a long turnaround time. And if this is the case, could that mean that some users aren't actually placing requests because they're thinking, oh, it's going to take a week, that's too long for me to wait. So possibly we should look at other ways of communicating the turnaround time and maybe being able to align user expectations a bit better. As I discussed earlier in the presentation, we enabled the Expand My Results feature by default. One of my thoughts was whether users would start placing requests for items that they weren't really interested in, but they just saw the request link and went ahead and placed it. So in this question, I asked them why they requested this specific item, and the most common response from users that they required that specific resource, followed by it complemented the resources that they'd already found on the topic. And when I looked at this type of response, the type of response by type of user, so new or regular user, the trends did differ slightly. So those that were regular users of the service responded more frequently that they required this specific resource. And then the new users responded equally between requiring the resource and also that it complemented what they'd already found. There was also a similar trend between user groups as well. So staff and postgraduate students were more likely to say that they required the specific resource, whereas undergraduates nearly equally responded between requiring the resource and then it just complementing what they'd already found. So if the service does continue to expand to new users, we could probably expect to see more requests coming through which just complemented those resources that the user had already found on that topic. So after the user has placed the resource sharing request, they're able to monitor to some extent the status of their request through Primo. And I wanted to get an idea of whether this aspect of the service was used regularly or even known about. So only 24% of the users responded saying that they did check their account, whereas 40% of users didn't even know they could. And when split by user type, only one of the new users responded that they checked their account, and then the vast majority said that they didn't even know they could. The more regular users had less responses to not knowing they could, but still most chose not to. If our regular users of the service are more experienced with the expected wait time, they may not see the value in checking their account, so may not choose to do that. When looked at by user group, similar to the new users, the undergraduate students didn't know that they could check their account, whereas staff and postgraduates chose not to. So the survey results here suggest that maybe we should consider ways to better promote the ability for users to track their requests through their library account in Primo. In the survey, I asked users to rank from most important to least important from a list of possible features for a resource sharing requests. And I gave them 6 possible features. Some of these features already exist to some extent, but maybe not fully fledged, and others don't exist at all. On the left side, you can see starting from number 1, which was ranked the most important, to least important at number 6. And the percentage on the right side of the slide indicates how strong the consensus was between respondents for that ranking. So the most important feature, as ranked by 78% of the survey respondents, was that the ease of placing request was the most important. So less clicks, less searching, less hurdles to jump over makes the requesting process easier. The second most important feature, as rated by 59% of the users, was the ability to place multiple requests at once, kind of like a shopping cart style experience. And I'm going to skip down to number 6. Now, as this had a strong consensus among the survey respondents, 78% thought that SMS updates was the least important feature for a resource sharing service. And those features ranked at 3, 4 and 5 didn't really have strong consensus among users, but we can say they weren't as important as the ease of requesting or placing multiple requests at once, but definitely more important than SMS updates. So I'm thinking future enhancements to resource sharing service should really focus on ensuring the requesting process is as simple and as easy as possible, as well as possibly looking at an enhancement for placing multiple requests at once. At the end of the survey, I asked whether they would be likely to use the service again, and 94% were extremely likely and 6% were somewhat likely. I also asked them to explain why they chose that answer, and there were two prominent themes in their responses. So the first was that they were likely to use the service again basically because they had to. Many of the responses described the resources that they required were not available any other way, or that their research was very specialised, so they needed to request resources. The other key theme was that they're likely to use the service again because we did provide a fast turnaround time and were often described as being efficient, convenient, vital and an excellent service. So although users really have no other choice than to use our service, they do acknowledge and appreciate the efficiency and high standard provided by the library. So by doing this small research project, I feel like we've gained a lot of knowledge about user behaviour, motivations and preferences. I like that the service is now more visible to the users at their point of need, which has meant that there's less reliance on them having been recommended the service by a librarian or having them to seek out the service themselves. So this was quite evident in the data from my analytics reports and in the responses from the survey. I was surprised to find that user turnaround time expectation wasn't as nearly as fast as I thought it would be, but maybe this hints at why other users don't actually place resource sharing requests. Could we better label our resource sharing request link in Primo or communicate our actual really super fast turnaround time in some other way? And the changes in system configuration, whether they were big, like moving to Alma ISO resource sharing, or technically small, like enabling expand my results by default, had both seen impacts on the uptake of our resource sharing service. So making it easier to request means that they're just more likely to use it. Finally, there are a few things we need to look at to make improvements to the service. I'd like to look at I did this slide back in August, and I was really keen to look at some sort of unpaywall integration into Primo, which would really complement document delivery and our resource sharing service. So when there was no full text presented, they may be instead presented with a link to Unpaywall where they could find an open access version, and therefore they wouldn't need to go that extra step and place a resource sharing request. So this feature is coming up in the November release, and if you've been monitoring the ALMA list at all, there's a little bit of discussion on there about how this feature has been released and its configurations, and it potentially is not quite as good as maybe I was hoping. But I still think that's a must that we need to do for Primo. The next 2 points, there are more about marketing and communication steps and then finally, we should look at better enhancements to the requesting process for users. So we've got a couple of marketing communication issues there, maybe around turnaround time and then people knowing about their account, that they can monitor the requests themselves, and then looking at how we can maybe get a new feature for users to place multiple requests at once. In this project, I did target users of the service, but what I don't know is the expectations of users who actually don't use the service. So maybe this could be part 2. So thank you very much. I've got my link there to the Google Doc. So if you go there, it'll every slide where I used an analytics or Primo report, I've detailed what exactly I did and maybe some of the formulas I used, as well as the location of that report in the community analytics folders. So you should just be able to locate them and hit open, and it will run across your own institutional data. Some of the reports you may need to change the formula because they're specific to bond configurations, but I think majority of them you should just be able to run off your own. So please do go there and have a look, and if you have any feedback about the reports or any questions or anything, I'm really happy to answer. All right, thank you everyone.
Thanks, Jessie. That was fantastic. What a great service you're providing for your users. So, are there any questions for Jessie? Oh yes, Stacey.
Stacey from UQ. I have so many, so I'm glad I'm only just on the train right away because I might come and visit you with all these questions. It makes me really nervous, the idea of ticking the box like by default. And I wonder if I missed it while I was taking notes, if you've had any bad comments from users about, like you did testing for a number of, your Google Analytics. So I'm interested to know how many, because obviously you can only do like a drop in the ocean of what users are doing every day. And then if you have gotten any complaints from users about the no full text angle, and if you do any trend analysis of how many results you have that are no full text, because I do like a monthly trend analysis to try and see of the different resource types, how much we have in PCI that's full text and how much that isn't, and it's double, so that makes me all very nervous.
Maybe that's why I'm not so nervous. We haven't gone that kind of level of analysis yet, but I'd be keen to hear about how you do that. That would be interesting. When I was replicating the searches, I personally thought that maybe students that might have the most problem with it is when they're trying to find those peer-reviewed academic journal articles, and if they use those facets to refine their search, and then they'll be presented with 4, 5, 6 no full text results, and if that was a common theme among those searches, then maybe we shouldn't enable it by default. So when I did look at the Google Analytics for what searches I should replicate, I also looked for the searches that had faceted to peer review, availability, maybe articles as well, something along the lines of that. So I replicated those kinds of searches because that's where I did see maybe users having the biggest problem with being flooded with no full text results. What was your other question? It was about...
No, I asked way too many, which is why I need to come down and talk to you. Yeah, so...
There was something else.
Did you get any complaints?
Oh, complaints. So there was one thing that came to mind immediately when you said that was we did have feedback from users when they are presented with the no full text PCI result. They click on it and then our physical holdings populate the availability area, and those physical holdings are for something completely different, not related to that actual resource at all. So that's where we found most feedback and issues coming from was that particular feature, which is now going to be in the NERS enhancements for next year to be developed, some method to control that. I don't think we really received much negative feedback about there being no full text results, I guess because we had simplified the process for them to place the request through silent login and that kind of thing, that they just saw a request link instead, and maybe they just chose that instead of being, exiting that in a huff and puff of annoyance. Yeah. And we also relabeled our no full text message to say not available online or not available, click for request options. So we're kind of saying, hey, you may still have an option of getting this anyway. So not just you can't have it at that level.
I have so many. I'm a little bit nervous as well about the number of students or the number of people who could access this sort of service, because I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think we've got like 80,000 users active at the moment. And we have subsets that can't place document delivery as well. So are you concerned about like the ramping up, your numbers increasing and being able to keep that level of really quick turnaround? And do you have any thoughts, for example, of using like rapid ILL, for example, which we use, which has a really quick turnaround?
I'm definitely interested to hear about the new ALMA resource sharing platform or Ex Libris resource sharing platform more next year, and seeing whether that can maybe benefit that fast turnaround time and assisting users at the point of need. We have this service available, our current resource sharing service, to all staff and students, and as Alan mentioned, or Jeff mentioned, we have about nearly 4,500 students using it. So to us, it's quite a significant increase in the number of requests that have happened since we enabled it, and certainly towards the end of this year are our peak months for resource sharing requests. And I think the document delivery team have just gotten through the highest number of supplied requests that they've ever had. So that was in September, and they have still kept their 3-day turnaround time. Don't ask me how. They're just magic team. So they have been able to, still maintain that level, which we kind of have always done, that 3-day turnaround time. It may not be sustainable long term, and same with the budget, may not be sustainable, but that's a decision for the managers.
I'll stop because I'll stop because I think we're at time, aren't we? Like,
Sit down, Stacey. No, great questions. Thank you, Stacey, and Jessie will be around for the rest of the conference. So thank you very much, Jessie. Just a small gift from us to say thank you. Okay, so we have our final presentation before lunch. Yes, we're going to feed you again. So the next presentation is Kendall Kousek. So I'm just going to do Kendall's introduction while she's getting herself set up. So a lot of you will know Kendall. She's I was going to say a common presenter, but that's clearly not what I mean. But we often see her presenting at this forum, which is fantastic. So it's great to have your presentation today. So for those of you who maybe haven't met Kendall before, she's Discovery Services and Systems Librarian at Macquarie University. She works with multiple Ex Libris products. She recently led the project to pilot Leganto at Macquarie and is currently advising on its implementation. Kendall's experience in academic libraries in Australia and the UK includes institutional repositories, acquisitions, and e-resource management. So Kendall is going to present today moving the goalposts, aligning project milestones to development schedules. It's all yours.
So as mentioned, if you can hear me properly, today I'll be discussing Macquarie's journey with the Leganto reading list management system and how our pilot and implementation have been influenced by the development of this product. Despite the title of this presentation, I don't want you to think this be a negative perspective of Ex Libris' development of Leganto. In fact, out of my work with ALMA, Primo and Leganto, I can definitely say that working with Llegando has been my favourite. I'm very grateful for the way that Ex Libris have approached the development of Llegando as a collaborative project with their customer base. Cool. So today's presentation will cover the listed topics. I'll introduce you to Macquarie University and explain how we started with Llegando. I'll walk you through some of the issues we encountered during our pilot and rollout and how we worked through these issues. And then I'll give a brief overview of our future challenges. So Macquarie University prides itself on being a progressive and influential institution. We have one campus and are located in Sydney, Australia, in the Macquarie Park Tech Precinct, about 40 minutes north of the CBD by train. We have 5 faculties, as listed up there, and there are about 45,000 students and 2,000 staff. So Macquarie University has always had one library for the whole campus and was lucky enough to have a new purpose-built library opened in 2011. So the library is centrally located on campus, and it's definitely one of the most distinct buildings with its metal slats on the exterior. We are visited up to 15,000 times a day, have seating for 2,200, and house 1.2 million physical items and 900,000 electronic titles. So now on to our Leganto journey and the challenges and opportunities that we have encountered along the way. So Macquarie University decided to implement the Leganto reading list management system in 2017, after using Aquila as our unit readings repository since 2012. We ran a multi-phase pilot to introduce Leganto, and this approach allowed us to formulate our plan for a full-scale rollout. The first stage of the pilot involved a partnership with our Faculty of Arts. We had 8 instructors volunteer to use Leganto in their units for the second teaching session of 2017. This gave us the ability to test out the system with a small group and identify where any issues occurred. We continued the strategy of working with a small group of instructors in our short third teaching session of that year. Then, in the first teaching session of 2018, we widened our pilot group. By this point, we had 3 departments in the Faculty of Arts mandating the use of the system, as well as multiple volunteers from around the institution. In the second teaching session of 2018, our pilot grew again to 180 reading lists. The pilot of Leganto ended in December 2018, and we started rolling out the system to more departments and faculties in 2019. For Session 2, 2019, which is our current teaching session, we have engagement with Leganto from all faculties on campus, and we have reading lists made available for over 450 courses. By the beginning of 2018, we were keen for the NERS call to open, as we had some suggestions for the system based on our experience with our first large cohort of reading lists. These suggestions were related to our library workflows, as well as the user feedback we'd received. NERS is the new enhancement request system and allows the users of the product who are members of Igloo or Illuna the ability to submit enhancement ideas and have the community vote for which ones should be developed by Ex Libris. This is one of the tools that we use to influence the development of the product to meet the needs of our workflows and processes. The first suggestion that we submitted related to linking for electronic articles in Leganto. In one of the early phases of our pilot, we approached a department in our medical faculty to use Leganto for their reading lists. We wanted to try out the system for courses outside of arts, as we had been warned by other institutions that different faculties and departments would have different experiences with the system. And they were right. One of the issues that this group encountered with their reading lists related to open access resources, which were more prevalent on these medical lists. One of the services that the library provides in reading list processing is ensuring that the links on reading lists land on the actual reading. That way, the student doesn't have to click through the journal contents looking for their reading. That's not explicitly stated anywhere, but it is an expectation that our instructors have of our service. So in the past, the instructors sent these reading lists as Word documents, and the library embedded the direct link to the resource in the Aquila record, which was then published to Primo. With Leganto, this changed, as the citation was added to the reading list, and the Alma link resolver automatically provided the links to our holdings. Unfortunately, with open access resources, Ex Libris does not or cannot provide article-level linking with the Alma link resolver. Instead, the links land on the journal homepage. The library knew that we had the ability to override these links in Alma using the disable resolver functionality, but this was not something we communicated, as we expected to fix the links before the list was published. However, what actually happened was that when this group of instructors created their own list in the Leganto interface, the instructor would add the citations from the Primo search, they would check that the link was working and find it wasn't working as expected. They would then try to update the source field where the link is stored, but because Alma was doing an automatic match to our holdings using the metadata, the Alma links kept appearing, even when that source URL field was edited. To stop the system from making the automatic match to our holdings in Alma, the instructors then removed as much metadata as they could think of from the citation until Alma no longer recognised the record. Then the direct link that they added would be the one that worked. As you can imagine, I was a little bit concerned when we started receiving the complaints from the instructors with the explanation of what they had been doing to get the system to work in the manner that they expected. So in order to ensure that this negative experience did not continue to happen to these instructors, the first idea that we suggested in this round of NERS was the ability to hide the links from within the Leganto screen. We would prefer that the instructor could easily deselect the Alma links rather than trying to trick the system in any convoluted way. This gave the instructor the control to manage which links to direct the student to without any library intervention. This idea was merged with 2 other institutions' similar ideas and was voted in as the top request in 2018, so it must have resonated with the community. Medicine is one of our smaller faculties and have very engaged learning designers who promote innovation, so it would have been a good option to target to have all of their reading lists in Leganto early in the pilot. However, this issue, coupled with other concerns that this particular department had with the system, meant that we did not get the enthusiastic support that we had perhaps expected. So we did not focus on the rollout of Leganto in this faculty for another few stages of the project. Another of the enhancements in 2018 that we championed was reading list rollover functionality. After our first teaching session in 2018 with a large uptake, we knew we were not equipped staffing-wise to maintain the level of reading list creation that we had just completed, as well as manually managing the existing reading lists into the future. We needed an automated method for reusing reading lists that would allow us to focus our energies on the uptake of new lists in Leganto. The reading list duplication functionality did already exist, and we used this option to make use of reusing the Leganto lists that are being created to date. However, the issue was that this duplication functionality was not yet on par with the existing readings repository that we were using. Our previous system allowed us to bulk roll over the readings so that the copyright record was reactivated with the new course details. When the Leganto list was duplicated, the copyright record was wiped and the data had to be manually re-entered. This assumed that all of the information was readily at hand, but not all of this information is stored in the citation record, and it was not feasible for staff to reopen every PDF to search out if it contained images or had secondary page ranges. Library staff were already wary of the new system, and in order for them to buy into its use, it needed to meet our requirements. It was an added step that they need to re-enter and recalculate the copyright records. So duplicating the reading list did not save the library time, which is one of our goals for implementing Leganto. These delays caused stress in the library and also on the faculty, which is not what we wanted. So we looked for ways to improve the process. So we submitted another enhancement request that was merged with other institutions' enhancements and was accepted, asking to duplicate the data in the copyright records upon duplication of the list. We did not phrase the request as rollover functionality, but as an extension of the reading list duplication process, but rollover was essentially what was required. Ex-Libris informed us in May that they had instructor rollover scheduled for the August release, which would address the enhancement we were after. In fact, what they had developed was even better than what we had actually asked for. Instead of just copying the data over, the calculation also happened at the same time. Sometimes we can be too close to the work and not look at the bigger picture, which is what Ex-Libris did in this case. However, when the instructor rollover functionality arrived, it didn't work exactly as required. It did, of course, roll over the copyright if configured, as asked for in the NERS process, but there was an issue with the display of the rollover options. If the instructor rolled over the list, they would see the settings exactly as the library had configured them in ALMA. But our instructors did not often roll over the list. The main issue with expecting our instructors to roll over the list themselves is that it is not always the same teaching staff who teach the unit year after year, so they do not necessarily have access to the old list in order to roll it over. So it was better that the library manage this process. But if a librarian rolled over the list, they saw the settings as they were out of the box. They did not see the options that had been configured by their library in ALMA, which may be completely different. We did not want the librarian to have to find the procedure and double-check our preferred settings every time they rolled over a list. One of the intentions of the pilot was to configure the system as required, then hand over responsibility of the reading list to the team who owns the unit reading service. Unfortunately, this issue stopped me from being able to share this task with the unit readings team, and instead I had to take responsibility for the rollover process. However, the issue was reported by multiple libraries and resolved in the February 2019 release. After working on the instructor rollover and realising it wasn't 100% ready, we started to look into the bulk processing of rollovers using the course loader job, as we thought this should speed up the process. At Macquarie, we do not use the course loader integration to load the courses into ALMA. Instead, we use the courses API to upload the courses and then update their information. This load is based on information sourced from our central courses database and ensures that we have up-to-date information on student enrolments and course instructors. This has been our practice since we started using Reading List in Alma back in 2015. As the courses already existed in Alma and we didn't need to create new courses as part of the course loader job, we only need to roll over the reading lists, and this is where we ran into our first issue. Despite the online help pages stating that it was possible to roll over reading lists to existing courses, the system did not allow this to happen, and Ex-Libris scheduled the issue to be resolved in January 2019's release, just in time for our teaching session that started at the end of February. So in January's hotfix release, the issue was resolved, and we went ahead and rolled over the reading list in bulk on the 14th of January. However, the process was not perfect, and there were some issues identified. On rollover, we wanted to keep the instructors assigned to the course, plus apply them to the new version of the reading list. However, when we rolled over the list using this job, the instructors were kept on the course, but they were not added to the reading list. This required our unit reading staff to enter each reading list that had been rolled over and then manually select the instructors that were to be applied to the list. An associated issue to the instructors not being assigned to the list as part of the job is that reading list owner letters are not sent when collaborators are added to the list in bulk. As we had a tight time frame for instructors to approve their list and send it to the library for processing, this time it actually worked in our favour that the instructors were not assigned to the reading list in bulk. Because as our staff manually added the instructors, the letters were then sent out and alerted those teaching staff that their new list existed. However, moving forward, we require that these notifications are sent when the bulk update is run, as it would put a strain on our resources should we be required to email each instructor individually every time we carry out a rollover. We update our Salesforce case with our requests, and another institution has added the idea to the ideas exchange, and Ex-Libris is scheduled for this gap to be resolved in November 2019, just in time for our 2020 reading list to be rolled over. Overall, the course loader integration and instructor rollover functionality has allowed us to move forward with bulk rollover of reading lists. One of the intended outcomes at the end of the pilot project was for me to step back from the day-to-day management of Leganto and automate as many processes as possible. But while rollovers can be done in bulk, the process still requires a lot of manual intervention to set up the file properly, then deal with these unexpected outcomes. The course loader rollover process is carried out by the Discovery Services and Systems team as we're the Alma administrators, and as yet this process cannot be configured to run on a schedule. It's still not clear to me if this will ever be achievable, even when the identified issues are resolved. As we have multiple teaching sessions that are out of sync with our main teaching periods, there are multiple times throughout the year that this rollover process is carried out. We will need to look at ways of improving it, as it currently sits as a calendar reminder in my calendar that I schedule in at the beginning of the year based on the multiple teaching schedules that our institution publishes. Occasionally, we need to be reminded by teaching staff that their list is to be rolled over as an out-of-sync teaching session begins. The main roadblock that could have stopped the implementation moving forward at our intended pace was not related to the functionality within Leganto, but instead to the functionality that connects to Leganto. Macquarie Library made the decision early in our pilot to only publish reading lists to those students enrolled in the course. This was to ensure that our copyright materials could only be viewed by those enrolled students, but also to limit the ability for others not enrolled in the course to use the discussions and the suggestions functionality. Every student must access their reading list in Leganto via an LTI link in the course's Moodle page. LTI stands for Learning Tools Interoperability, which is an education technology standard that connects a learning management system with external tools. This LTI technology shares the course and the student details from Moodle to Leganto, so that Leganto knows that that specific student has access to that specific reading list. After clicking this link, the reading list is saved to the My Lists page in the student's Leganto account. Ex-Libris has an integration profile in Alma that can be configured so that your LMS can connect to Leganto. You must also configure the LTI for Leganto within your LMS, and this is what caused issues for our implementation. At Macquarie University, the library is not the business owner of Moodle. Instead, this is owned by the institution's central learning and teaching team. Due to the different external systems that connect to our Moodle using that LTI technology, the LTI option is locked down so that it can only be configured by system administrators of Moodle, and the LTI link can only be added to course pages by those with high-level Moodle editing rights. Each faculty has a group of learning designers that have these rights, as they are responsible for supporting each course's page in Moodle. In order to ensure that we could successfully pilot Leganto at Macquarie, we first had to meet with the Faculty of Arts Learning Designers and get their agreement to add the LTI link to each volunteer's page in Moodle. Luckily, they agreed to take on this workload, and the out-of-the-box LTI links were added to Moodle. However, as our pilot participation rates grew, so did the workload that was required. As we were unsure of the exact courses taking part in each teaching session until close to the beginning of session, we would provide the lists of the course codes taking part in the pilot to the learning designers in the week before teaching began, updating this information again in the first week of session. This is the learning designers' busiest period, with instructors requiring support with their Moodle pages, so our request to add links caused quite a backlog in their work. This backlog and having access points added meant that there was a backlog in students getting access to their reading lists, which is not a good first experience with the system. If our pilot was to grow and expand to different faculties, we could no longer rely on the learning designers to be responsible for this access point. To ensure that the Leganto implementation was sustainable in the long term, we partnered with the institution's central learning and teaching team to create a custom Moodle block incorporating the LTI technology. The library designed the block, and the learning and teaching team built it. The best feature about the block is that it can be added to the course page by the instructor. It is not reliant on a learning designer adding the link. The library provides instructions on adding the block in our instructor guide and sends these instructions once the list is published. Without the creation of the block, we would have been reliant on the faculty learning designers' goodwill in adding the LTI links in Moodle, and we would only have been able to roll out the system at a pace that they could maintain. This block allowed us to set the implementation pace at one that suited the library and ensured that the workload of adding LTI links to Moodle was dispersed. So there are still some aspects that we are refining and enhancing as time goes on. Now that the system is rolled out to most of campus, we can focus our efforts on improving the use of the system rather than on the introduction of the system. One of the goals that we have not yet achieved is refining the way that we make reading lists discoverable. Prior to the introduction of Leganto, students had not been required to access their readings through Moodle. Instead, they had been able to visit our Primo instance, select the unit reading's local scope, and search on their course code to find their assigned readings. These readings were a mix of library-owned titles added to the Alma reading list and imported Aquila records for the copyright material. As we introduced Leganto reading lists, we were concerned that students may miss the reading list access point in the LMS and still expect to access their readings from Primo. To minimise confusion, we create resource recommender records to display in Primo when the course code is searched. These resource recommender records contain a link to the Leganto reading list using the reading list permalink. The manual record creation process is not sustainable for the long term, especially as we have a number of out-of-sync teaching sessions. One of my goals is to phase out this support once Leganto reading lists become the norm across campus and students become used to accessing their reading lists through the LMS. Looking back over our 2 years with Leganto at Macquarie University, we have achieved a lot. We completed a successful pilot of Leganto. This included configuration of the system, learning and documenting the workflows, and training library staff. It also included getting library staff buy into the system and building their confidence. Other important aspects were liaising with faculties and getting buy-in from departments. This couldn't have been achieved without strong collaboration from different teams in the library and a willingness from the departments to work with us. We learnt a lot during the pilot and were able to use these lessons to plan out our larger implementation. Now, we're in the final stages of rolling out the system across campus. After this current teaching session, there will be very little, if any, use of the previous unit readings repository. Despite the issues outlined in this presentation, the Llegando reading list system is very good, and the features and development of the product have allowed us to successfully roll out across campus. The future plan for Leganto is to increase the usage of the library's unit reading service. Previously, those instructors that only assigned library-owned materials did not bother contacting us to discuss their teaching resource needs, as they could link to these resources from the LMS. Now that we are out talking to them about this system, we are able to encourage the use of Leganto while also raising their awareness of other issues related to their teaching materials, such as limited user ebook models and how including these titles on a reading list that the library monitors can improve the user experience. Overall, this presentation is focused on the issues we encountered and how we worked through them to grow the use of Leganto at Macquarie University. I discussed the initial issues we encountered during our pilot and how we harnessed the NERS process to ensure resolutions were developed. I also talked about this new functionality and how it does not always meet your requirements when it is released. I provided details of some of the issues we have encountered and a potential roadblock we are able to address. I've also covered an issue we need to finalise before our implementation of Llegando is complete. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Kendall. It's great to see the work that Macquarie has been doing with improving the Leganto experience for other institutions through that the NERS process. So we've got a few minutes before lunch, so any questions from the floor for Kendall?
So can I just double check you're planning on taking the records out of Primo, or like the resource recommender?
At the moment, I've taken a look at the analytics for the Leganto access, and it looks like LTI access to Leganto reading list is sitting at about 90% of reading list access. So therefore, I'm drawing the conclusion that it's about 10% through those permalinks through the resource recommender. The latest Primo release also brought out a bit of granularity in the resource recommender reporting, and I can see that makes up about 20 to 30% of our resource recommender overall usage is for those Leganto specific records. So I'm kind of thinking that it's a small percentage of the overall resource recommender usage, plus it's a very small percentage of the access points. So at some point we'll just wipe those, but of course need a consensus with everyone involved in the project first.
Yeah, I might have a chat with you after, because we load in records, just like the course level record, as electronic portfolios.
Oh, okay.
And that lets us track them in the link resolver analytics as well, and we get quite a lot of searches for like the course codes and then resulting clicks through in link resolver. So that might be an option instead of resource recommender, perhaps?
Yeah, might be an alternative.
Yeah, they're very popular.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Kendall. Just a small gift from us to say thank you. And so that's the morning session done. I really want to thank the presenters for doing such a great job. I haven't had to pull out any kind of dramatic timekeeping skills, so I really appreciate that. And it's great to have the questions coming from the audience as well. So we're having an hour for lunch, so we'll have catering over in the corner. Really encourage you to get up, move about, talk to each other, because it has been a quite intense morning of a lot of information. I also just want to point out at the back of the room, you'll see it's not a new sponsor that's arrived, but there's a raffle, and it's for the Indigenous Literacy Foundation. So if you're interested in talking to the staff down there, take some time over the lunch break, and they'll be here again tomorrow at lunchtime, I believe, as well. So enjoy your lunch break, enjoy some sustenance, and we'll see you back here at 1:30. Thanks.